The Metropolitan Transit Authority, or MTA, of the New York City metro area collected over $16 billion in revenue in 2019. Almost half of it came from dedicated taxes like the Metropolitan Commuter Transportation Mobility Tax and subsidies from cities and states in the region. But half of that revenue came from fare boxes on buses and subways and from tolls on bridges and tunnels. Both sources are susceptible to issues with what we call elasticity. Elasticity is the ratio of the percentage change in a dependent variable to a percentage change in an independent variable. For the MTA, the dependent variable is riders, counted as swipes at the turnstiles, and cars traveling over and through the tolled bridges and tunnels. The independent variable is the cost of accessing MTA assets, measured as the fare on subways and buses and the toll per vehicle on bridges and tunnels. Ridership would be considered elastic if its percentage change is larger than a percentage change in fares and tolls. For example, if rides fell 20% in response to a 10% hike in fares, the opposite would make riders inelastic. If, for example, rides only fell 7% in response to the same 10% fare hike. In this case, we're specifically observing something called the price elasticity of demand. It's the result of dividing the percentage change in the quantity demanded of a good or service by the percentage change in the price of that good or service. In May of 2015, a report by the Kroll Bond Rating Agency on the New York MTA's transportation revenue bonds described the MTA ridership as relatively inelastic, noting that, quote, fare revenue typically declines temporarily following a fare increase. As a result, a fare increase of 4% planned at the time is expected to yield a revenue increase of only 3.6% annually. That implies a drop in ridership of just 0.5% in reaction to a 4% fare hike. If we plug those values into our price elasticity of demand equation, we would get an elasticity of negative 0.12. Such proximity to zero, even on the negative side of the scale, is how we can quantitatively tell that the MTA's ridership is price inelastic. The same can be said of the MTA's bridge and tunnel travelers. The same bond rating agency cites an MTA traffic study showing that toll booth volume will decrease as much as 0.358% for every 1% increase in toll rates. An elasticity of negative 0.358, though, is largely still relatively inelastic. If we could graph the demand curve for the MTA's transit and bus access, we could compute the percentage change between points on the x-axis, typically quantity, or rides in this case, and the percentage change between points on the y-axis, price, to arrive at a measure of elasticity. A more accurate approach, called arc elasticity, uses averages. So a percentage change in rides from 60,000 to 40,000 hourly would actually be calculated using the average of 40 and 60,000 as the base denominator. So instead of calculating the percentage change as a result of 20,000 over 60,000, or 20,000 divided by 60,000, you would instead actually calculate 20,000 divided by 50,000. Using this approach for calculating the percentage changes that go into the price elasticity equation is preferred because it eliminates the changes in elasticity that may result from reversing the direction of change. If the demand curve for the MTA's transit and buses was linear, we would expect elasticity to be inconsistent. Actually, elasticity would become smaller and trend toward inelasticity at some point. That's because a demand curve with a linear slope has a constant exchange rate between price and quantity. Every dollar drop in price results in a specific increase in units demanded. Not a specific percentage change or a specific percentage increase, but an increase in numeric demand. So a drop in fare from 80 cents to 70 cents would result in the same numerical increase in rides as a drop in fare from 30 cents to 20 cents. But the percentage change in both of these cases is different for both the price and the quantity of rides. Actually, the small percentage change in fare from 80 cents to 70 cents results in a larger percentage increase in rides per hour from 40,000 to 60,000. Compare this to the larger percentage change in fare from 30 cents to 20 cents, almost an arced 40% drop, versus the smaller percentage change in rides per hour from 140,000 to 160,000, just over 13% gained. This kind of makes sense. We should expect that the MTA's ridership elasticity will be smaller as the base fare becomes smaller, and that even larger percentage changes in fares will have a modest impact on riders' willingness to use the service. But if the MTA were closer to where its inflation-adjusted fare would be without price controls, $15 a ride, even small percentage changes may make all the difference in determining whether taking the bus or train is really worth the expense. If riders get price sensitive, this could indicate that the transit authority has entered the unit price elastic part of the demand curve. In such a case, percentage increases in the fare are offset by equivalent percentage drops in ridership. If ridership goes fully elastic, then total revenue will start to fall as fare increases, indicating riders are disproportionately fleeing the system in reaction to higher fares. For the MTA, the lesson here is to remain in the inelastic range of your demand curve, and even proportionally large hikes in the fare may have only modest impacts on ridership, keeping changes to total revenue positive. But even the fare box in a congested city like New York can probably be exhausted. If fares go too high, they may reach a part of the demand curve that's more elastic, with more riders reacting to smaller changes to a fare that makes up a larger proportion of their individual budgets. And the role of a good in household budgets is a significant determinant of the price elasticity of demand. A reliable way to get to work every day is highly valuable by most New York City commuters. And therefore, as much as people will bemoan a fare increase, they'll largely accept it as a relatively sizable but necessary part of their planned expenditures. The availability of substitutes is also important. And as big a chunk of someone's budget monthly as MetroCards may be, virtually any alternative way of traveling more than 3 miles around the city as quickly would be more expensive per mile. Of course, this can change over time. That same 2015 KBRA report stated that the MTA's ridership was inelastic in the long run, but noted that in the immediate short run, after a fare hike, ridership may fall. This seemed to be what contributed to a 4% hike only anticipated to raise 3.6% revenue. As time plays a role in price elasticity, and typically as we observe further out from a price change, you would expect demand for a monopoly public service like the New York City MTA to trend towards inelasticity. The same, though, can't be said for some commodities, like crude oil, which tends to see elasticity increase over time, likely as people seek alternative sources of energy. Sometimes, though, you may want consumers to seek out an alternative. And understanding just the price elasticity of a product like, say, marijuana flowers, for example, isn't useful enough. You'll need to know how the change in the price of one good changes the quantity demanded of another, like alcohol. More on that next.